Listen carefully, because this is not a gentle message meant to comfort your flesh. This is a wake-up call for your spirit. As Christmas draws near, the world is distracted by lights, gifts, and celebrations. But heaven is not distracted. Heaven is watching. Heaven is listening. Heaven is waiting for believers who understand authority, timing, and obedience. December 20th is not just another date on the calendar. It is a threshold, a moment of transition, a divine checkpoint before Christmas where God examines hearts, motives, and faith. Many celebrate the birth of Christ, yet ignore the power Christ released. Many remember the manger, but forget the mandate. Jesus was not born just to be admired. He was born to establish dominion, to restore authority, and to awaken purpose. Here is the shocking truth. God does not respond to noise. God responds to alignment. You have been praying, fasting, and believing, but heaven is asking one question: are you positioned correctly? Before Christmas arrives, some doors will close forever. Before Christmas arrives, some doors will open suddenly. The difference will not be luck. It will be spiritual posture. Faith is not passive. Faith is forceful. Hope is not wishing. Hope is expectation backed by action. Prayer is not begging. Prayer is legislation in the spirit realm. This season is not about waiting for miracles. It is about becoming a vessel that can carry them. God is exposing distractions, severing unhealthy attachments, and calling his people to rise above emotional Christianity. This is the hour of mature faith. Faith that speaks. Faith that stands. Faith that refuses to retreat. Stop saying one day. Stop saying after the holidays. Stop delaying obedience. What you do before Christmas determines what follows after Christmas. Some of you are one decision away from breakthrough, one act of obedience away from elevation, one bold step away from divine acceleration. Heaven is not asking for perfection. Heaven is demanding participation. You were not born to survive seasons. You were born to shift them. You were not called to blend in. You were called to stand out. You were not saved to remain silent. You were empowered to declare. So rise, align your thoughts, cleanse your heart, speak with authority, move with intention. Do not let this moment pass you by. Before Christmas comes, choose to walk boldly, pray fiercely, and act decisively. Step into your calling, take responsibility for your faith, and starting today, live like you know heaven is backing you. December 20th stands as a spiritual boundary, a moment where time and purpose intersect in a way that demands attention. It is not merely a date approaching Christmas. It is a divine checkpoint where heaven evaluates readiness, alignment, and obedience. In spiritual terms, thresholds are moments when movement is possible, forward or backward, advancement or delay. What makes this moment critical is not the calendar itself, but the spiritual weight carried by decisions made before it. Seasons do not shift automatically. They shift in response to alignment. December 20th represents a pause before acceleration, a narrow gate where intentional faith determines what follows. Throughout scripture and spiritual history, moments just before celebration or victory were often moments of testing. Before promise comes examination. Before elevation comes alignment. December 20th functions in this same pattern. It exposes motives, reveals priorities, and highlights whether faith has matured beyond emotion into disciplined action. It is a moment when distractions are stripped away and clarity becomes unavoidable. What once felt optional suddenly becomes urgent. What was postponed can no longer wait. Heaven presses the believer to choose position over comfort and obedience over delay. This turning point is also about awareness. Many move through seasons unconsciously reacting instead of discerning. December 20th demands spiritual consciousness. It calls for believers to recognize that what happens internally will dictate external outcomes. Thoughts, words, habits, and responses are being weighed, not to condemn, but to determine capacity. Capacity determines responsibility, and responsibility determines access. This is why some will experience sudden openings after Christmas while others will feel resistance. It is not favoritism, but preparation meeting opportunity. Alignment at this threshold is not limited to prayer alone. It includes how one responds to correction, how consistently one walks in integrity, and how boldly one stands in faith when circumstances challenge belief. Alignment means order, spiritual order, mental order, and emotional order. Disorder delays momentum. December 20th highlights areas where realignment is necessary, areas where compromise has been tolerated, and areas where obedience must be restored. It becomes a mirror reflecting not what one hopes to be, but what one truly is in practice. This moment also carries the weight of finality. Some doors are seasonal. If not entered at the right time, they close. December 20th marks the narrowing of certain windows of opportunity. Not every delay is harmless. Some postponements create spiritual stagnation. This turning point urges immediate response, decisive movement, and intentional positioning. Waiting for a more convenient moment can cost momentum already released in the spirit realm. At the same time, this threshold carries promise. Where alignment is present, acceleration follows. What felt slow can suddenly move with speed. What seemed distant can become accessible. The urgency of this moment is not meant to create fear, but focus. It sharpens discernment and demands seriousness of faith. December 20th becomes the dividing line between casual belief and activated authority, between intention and execution, between preparation and manifestation. God is not moved by volume, repetition, or emotional display. Heaven is not impressed by how loud the prayer is, how long the fast lasts, or how spiritual the language sounds. Noise can be produced without transformation, but alignment requires surrender. Alignment is the invisible agreement between belief, behavior, and obedience. When alignment is missing, activity increases, but results decrease. This is why many feel spiritually exhausted yet unfruitful. They are busy but not positioned. God responds not to effort alone, but to order. Alignment begins in the inner life. Thoughts must agree with truth, not fear. Words must echo faith, not contradiction. Actions must reflect trust, not hesitation. When these elements are fragmented, spiritual power leaks. Noise attempts to compensate for misalignment, but heaven does not negotiate with disorder. Alignment creates clarity, and clarity releases authority. When the heart is aligned, prayer becomes precise. When the mind is aligned, decisions become bold. When actions are aligned, movement follows without resistance. Many confuse intensity with effectiveness. Intensity without alignment produces frustration. Alignment without noise produces results. God is not summoned by desperation. He is engaged by obedience. Obedience is alignment in motion. It is the decision to move according to instruction, even when emotion resists. This is why alignment often requires uncomfortable adjustments. It demands the removal of habits that feel familiar but hinder growth. It requires releasing relationships that disrupt spiritual focus. It confronts internal conflicts where personal desire competes with divine direction. Noise often comes from insecurity. When identity is unclear, performance increases. When calling is uncertain, striving becomes constant. Alignment settles identity. It removes the need to prove and replaces it with confidence to stand. A person in alignment does not rush, panic, or compare. Their spirit is anchored. Their actions are deliberate. Heaven responds because heaven recognizes its own order reflected on earth. Alignment also determines timing. Even the right action at the wrong time produces limited results. Alignment positions a believer to move when heaven moves. It sharpens spiritual sensitivity so that instruction is recognized immediately and followed without delay. This is why some prayers feel unanswered. The request may be right, but the alignment is off. God does not ignore his people, but he honors structure. Structure sustains what prayer attracts. When alignment is present, prayer shifts from pleading to partnership. The believer no longer asks from a place of lack, but speaks from a place of authority. Words carry weight because life backs them. Faith is no longer theoretical. It is embodied. This is when doors open without force and resistance weakens without struggle. Alignment removes unnecessary warfare. It shortens battles that would have lasted years. God's response is consistent. He responds to alignment with clarity, provision, protection, and acceleration. Noise seeks attention. Alignment carries permission. Permission grants access. Access produces movement. Where alignment is restored, momentum follows. Where alignment is resisted, delay remains. This principle governs spiritual progress, determines effectiveness, and separates effort from impact. Faith is not a feeling that rises and falls with circumstances. It is a force that must be exercised with intention. Authority is not granted to the passive, but to those who understand their position and act accordingly. Many believe faith is proven by patience alone, but faith is equally proven by movement. When faith remains internal, it produces comfort. When faith is released through action, it produces change. Authority becomes visible only when faith steps beyond agreement and into execution. Action is the language faith speaks. Belief without corresponding movement lacks power. In the spiritual realm, faith is recognized not by what is hoped for, but by what is acted upon. Authority follows obedience. When action aligns with conviction, spiritual resistance weakens. This is why hesitation delays breakthroughs. Delay is not always doubt, but it often signals uncertainty about authority. When authority is understood, action becomes immediate. Prayer, when rooted in authority, shifts from emotional appeal to deliberate declaration. It is not a request made from inferiority, but a statement made from alignment. Words spoken in faith are not empty sounds. They are commands shaped by trust and responsibility. This kind of prayer does not wait for permission from circumstances. It operates from an understanding that spiritual realities influence natural outcomes. Authority speaks first and watches results follow. Faith that carries authority refuses to negotiate with fear. Fear seeks to silence action by magnifying risk. Authority responds by magnifying truth. When truth is spoken consistently, faith strengthens. This strength is not aggressive, but confident. It stands without apology. It moves without validation. Authority does not rush, yet it does not retreat. It advances with clarity because it knows its source. Action also reveals ownership. Those who act in faith take responsibility for outcomes without surrendering trust. They do not blame circumstances or retreat when pressure increases. Authority matures through responsibility. Each step taken in faith reinforces identity and expands capacity. This is why small acts of obedience matter. They train faith to move under pressure and prepare authority to operate at higher levels. Faith that remains silent becomes stagnant. Authority requires expression. Silence in the face of opposition weakens momentum. Speaking with authority is not about volume, but conviction. Words backed by alignment carry weight. When faith speaks, environments respond. Atmospheres shift. Obstacles lose permanence. This does not mean resistance disappears instantly, but it means resistance no longer controls direction. Action separates spectators from participants. Many admire faith, but few deploy it. Authority is not activated by observation. It is activated by engagement. Faith that acts grows stronger with each step. Each movement reinforces trust and sharpens discernment. Authority becomes refined through use. It gains precision through practice. Faith and authority are inseparable. Faith supplies the confidence. Authority supplies the permission to act. Together they create momentum that transcends circumstance. Where faith is active, authority is recognized. Where authority is exercised, results follow. This is the nature of effective belief, and this is the path of those who move beyond intention into impact. Christmas has been reduced by culture to a season of nostalgia, decoration, and tradition, but its true significance reaches far beyond sentiment. The birth of Christ was not an isolated miracle meant only to inspire admiration. It was a strategic intervention designed to restore dominion. The manger was not a symbol of weakness, but a declaration that authority can enter the world quietly and still overturn systems. From the beginning, this moment carried purpose, power, and assignment. Celebration without understanding strips Christmas of its original intent. Dominion speaks of responsibility, influence, and stewardship. Christ did not enter history to create passive followers, but empowered representatives. His arrival marked the return of authority that had been surrendered. This authority was not political or temporary. It was spiritual and enduring. It redefined identity and repositioned believers as active participants in shaping their environment. Remembering Christmas without embracing this authority reduces faith to ritual instead of relationship. Purpose is revealed through understanding why something exists. The purpose of Christ's birth was not merely redemption from sin, but restoration to function. Salvation was the doorway, not the destination. Dominion is the outcome of restored relationship. When believers focus only on forgiveness and ignore authority, they remain grateful but ineffective. The message of Christmas calls believers to move beyond gratitude into governance, beyond remembrance into responsibility. Celebration has its place, but celebration without activation creates imbalance. Lights, music, and traditions cannot replace obedience, discipline, and action. Christmas reminds believers that heaven trusted humanity with authority again. This trust requires maturity. Authority demands accountability. It requires alignment of values, decisions, and actions with divine intent. Dominion is exercised through daily choices, not seasonal emotion. The birth of Christ disrupted spiritual hierarchies. It challenged darkness, confronted deception, and introduced a new standard of authority rooted in truth and humility. This authority was not imposed through force, but established through obedience. It demonstrated that dominion flows from submission to divine order. Understanding this reshapes how believers view power, not as control over others, but as influence through alignment. Christmas also redefines identity. Those who understand dominion no longer see themselves as victims of circumstance or observers of life. They recognize their role as carriers of light, agents of change, and stewards of purpose. This identity influences how challenges are faced, how decisions are made, and how faith is expressed. Dominion mindset replaces survival mentality. It shifts focus from endurance to impact. Remembering the manger without embracing the mandate creates spiritual contradiction. The child born carried authority that would later be demonstrated openly, but it was present from the beginning. This authority is not limited to history. It continues through those who understand and apply it. Christmas becomes a reminder that power entered humanity not to be admired, but to be expressed. It calls believers to live intentionally, speak boldly, and act responsibly in every sphere of life. Delay often disguises itself as wisdom, patience, or preparation, but many times it is simply fear wearing a reasonable face. Breakthrough does not usually resist people. Hesitation does. When obedience is postponed, momentum is lost and spiritual sensitivity dulls. Delay creates distance between instruction and action, and in that space, doubt begins to grow. What was once clear becomes complicated. What was once urgent becomes negotiable. This is how opportunities slowly slip away without obvious warning. Obedience carries timing within it. When instruction is given, grace for that moment is also released. That grace is not stored for later use. It is activated through immediate response. Delayed obedience attempts to act without the same measure of empowerment. This is why acting late often feels harder than acting at the right time. Resistance increases not because opposition grew stronger, but because alignment weakened. Timing is not a detail. It is a component of obedience itself. itself. Excuses thrive in delay. The mind begins to seek confirmation instead of conviction. Comfort becomes a priority and risk feels unjustified. Delay allows external voices to drown out internal clarity. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, and fear of loss gain influence when action is postponed. The longer obedience is delayed, the more justification is created to avoid it altogether. What begins as a pause can turn into paralysis. Breakthrough requires decisiveness. Indecision drains energy and confuses direction. Immediate obedience does not mean reckless action. It means responsive action. It moves with awareness but without procrastination. When a step is taken promptly, faith strengthens and clarity increases. Each act of obedience sharpens discernment and builds confidence. Delay reverses this process, weakening resolve and increasing uncertainty. Acceleration is released through movement. Motion creates momentum, and momentum attracts support. When obedience is immediate, unseen assistance aligns. Resources, connections, and opportunities respond to decisive action. Delay interrupts this flow. It creates stagnation where movement was intended. Many pray for speed while practicing hesitation. Acceleration is not granted to those who wait endlessly. It is released to those who move intentionally. Delayed obedience often feels safer, but safety is an illusion. Missed timing carries consequences that patience cannot fix. Some doors do not remain open indefinitely. Some seasons cannot be revisited. Delay can turn instruction into regret. It can convert opportunity into memory. The cost of waiting too long is often greater than the risk of acting too soon. Immediate obedience requires trust. It demands belief that direction is sufficient even without full explanation. This trust is the fuel of breakthrough. When trust is present, action follows. When action follows, resistance weakens. Breakthrough is not forced, it is entered. Those who respond quickly position themselves ahead of fear and ahead of doubt. Delay gives fear time to organize and doubt time to strengthen. Obedience that moves without delay disrupts both and keeps momentum alive. Survival is a mindset rooted in reaction, but shifting seasons requires intention, authority, and vision. Many approach life defensively, hoping to endure challenges rather than influence outcomes. This mentality limits faith to coping mechanisms instead of transformative power. Believers were not designed to merely withstand pressure. They were equipped to alter environments. When faith is reduced to survival, purpose is postponed and impact is minimized. Shifting seasons begins with rejecting the idea that circumstances are unchangeable. Authority is the difference between endurance and influence. Those who understand authority do not wait for conditions to improve before acting. They recognize that conditions respond to direction. Authority does not deny reality, it reorders it. Speaking, deciding, and acting from a position of faith creates movement where stagnation once existed. Survival waits for relief. Authority creates change. This distinction shapes how challenges are approached and how outcomes are determined. Shifting seasons requires perspective. Those who survive focus on what is happening to them. Those who shift focus on what is happening through them. This internal shift changes language, behavior, and expectation. Complaints give way to declarations. Fear gives way to strategy. Reaction gives way to intention. Perspective determines posture, and posture determines power. When posture aligns with authority, influence increases. Passivity cannot shift anything. It preserves the current state while waiting for external intervention. Believers are called to partnership, not observation. Partnership requires participation. Every season responds to engagement. When engagement is absent, seasons linger. This is why some remain in cycles longer than necessary. Shifting requires movement, mental, spiritual, and practical. Faith that remains internal cannot influence external conditions. Declaring truth is a tool of influence. Words shape atmosphere. Silence allows conditions to dominate unchallenged. Declaration is not denial, it is alignment with higher reality. When believers speak with conviction, environments respond. Darkness loses dominance. Confusion gives way to clarity. Fear loses authority. Declaration reinforces identity and releases confidence. It is a key component of shifting seasons. Shifting seasons also requires consistency. One action rarely produces lasting change. Influence is built through repeated alignment and sustained obedience. Consistency establishes credibility in the spirit realm. It signals seriousness and readiness. When consistency is present, resistance weakens over time. Survival focuses on immediate relief. Shifting focuses on lasting transformation. Boldness is essential. Fear thrives where hesitation lives. Boldness confronts uncertainty and moves anyway. It does not wait for perfect conditions. It acts with what is available. Boldness activates authority and accelerates change. Those who shift seasons are not reckless, but resolved. They are clear in purpose and steady in direction. Believers who understand their role refuse to be silent observers of their own lives. They engage, declare, and act with intention. They do not shrink back in difficulty or lose focus in delay. They recognize that their presence carries influence and their obedience carries power. This understanding transforms survival into leadership and endurance into impact